From ghosts and haunted dolls to a creepy encounter at a gas station, I hope you enjoy this 1-hour compilation of horror stories from my channel. As always, thank you very much for your support over the last 3 years. I am Fearcrawler. Welcome to the video. I was scared of the dark as a child. It's a common enough fear. Many children share it. The difference is, I was scared not of the darkness and being unable to see in it. It was the things I could see in the dark. As a child, I slept on a love seat in the family room of my home. My mother, Sandy, despite having a room of her own, slept on the couch next to my love seat. A small table connected them in the shape of a reversed letter L. My love seat faced the direction of the TV, which was up against the same wall as our house's fireplace. But there would often not be a fire, and for my first few years, the TV would be turned off at night. The room would be plunged into pure darkness, and in my mother's sweet memory I say, God, did I hate it. I was a very frightened child, often scared of boogeymen and nightmares like one about a demonic fiend who resembled Zorak from Space Ghost hiding in my fridge, among other dreams. Many a night I awoke from a nightmare and began to see sinister shapes in the shadows against the wall with the fireplace staring at me. Most of these creatures have faded from my memory, but one sticks out in my mind. It was the figure of a cartoonishly tall and thin man with no distinct features, other than what appeared to be a cowboy hat on its head. As time went on, life began to seem scarier than some of my nightmares. Shortly before my 8th birthday, my great-grandmother, who I and my sister Erin called Old Grandma, passed away in her sleep. A few months later, my mother died of breast cancer. After that, my temper grew worse and my thoughts grew darker. I watched horror movies religiously, studying them and using what I learned to terrify my classmates and neighbors. By the time I had reached high school, my temper and behavior were in better check, though my mouth still often got me in trouble at school. I remember watching a horror movie that featured a character called the Shadow Man, and curious if he was based on a real legend, I Googled him and came across something called shadow people. One thing that caught my attention was that they were often described as wearing a hat. I immediately had a flashback to my strange encounter with the strange shadow as a small boy, and had to wonder, was it really just my imagination? It's been several years since then. I still love to scare people, and most of the time, I have no problem going for long walks in the dead of night, with the trees in my area blocking most of the sky in some areas of the roads and sidewalks. I sleep in a completely dark room, and hate it if light comes in while I'm trying to sleep. Though I'm more insecure about the grave than ghosts these days, I still wonder about that strange evening. My mother told me before she and I moved into the house with the rest of our family that the spirits of a little boy and girl haunted the house, and if a man entered the house, they would either slam doors or be heard running up and down the stairs to the upstairs. My uncle scoffs at the story and refuses to believe it, but sometimes I wonder. When I was a kid, I lived a few blocks away from my aunt's house. Since it was in walking distance, it wasn't uncommon for me to walk there on the weekends to visit my cousins. They were both girls and a little bit younger than myself, and even though I was older and a boy, we still got along pretty well. Typically on weekends we'd just hang out and watch cartoons, or maybe raid the cupboard for some cereal. They always seemed to have better stuff than what my mom bought. The younger of the two was the quieter one. She really didn't seem to have a lot of friends, unless you count the imaginary one she always seemed to talk to. At least that's what I always chalked this up to. You see, it really wasn't uncommon for her to go upstairs to the attic and sit up there by herself. I never really gave it that much thought. I figured that was just a normal part of adolescence, to have an imaginary friend, or maybe to have periods where you like solitude and just being by yourself. But every time she came down from the attic, she always insisted, and she sounded completely sincere when she said this, that she had been spending time up there with her friend. I'd always ask her about her friend and inquire what her name was, but I'd never really get a straight answer. She'd just get super shy and then keep completely silent. Again, I always just chalked this up to one of those imaginary friend things. I mean, even I had an imaginary friend at one point, but it was something I got over pretty quickly. But as time went on, instead of getting better about this imaginary friend of hers, things actually got progressively worse. What I mean by that is, she didn't seem to get over it. Instead, she started to talk more and more about her imaginary friend. After a while, she even started describing what she looked like. Blonde hair, blue eyes, the dress that she wore, things like that. Considering how young she was at the time, I thought she had quite an incredible imagination, because her description of this girl was very specific, and it never really changed. It was always consistent. Always the same hair, the same eyes, the same clothing, every single time. It almost became a running joke between my brothers and I. We even started teasing her about it, asking her when she was going to start getting over her imaginary friend and move on with life. In retrospect, yeah, it seemed kind of mean, but honestly, the stories that she kept sharing started to become tiresome. It was almost annoying. Maybe I was being a bit harsh back then. By the time I was 10 years old, we had moved to a different house, and as such, we didn't visit my cousins as much anymore. And when we did, I never brought up the imaginary friend with my cousin. I never made any mention of it. To be honest, she stopped talking about it too, but I think that was only because we used to tease her so badly about it. By the time I was in my early 20s, my aunt had moved out of that house and into a different one. And since the place was for rent, and I had a lot of fond memories there, I decided to move in. I want to say I had only been in there for maybe a few weeks, when I started hearing banging noises coming from the attic. This wasn't something that bothered me that much, and I really wasn't that concerned about it. It really wasn't uncommon for things like squirrels or other animals to get inside people's attics. I always figured that's what it was, so I never really did much investigating, unless you count going up there to put down traps or things like that. Otherwise, I really never spent much time in there after I'd moved in. As time went on, and I got more used to the place, it actually got easier to ignore the noises. But the weird thing is, it seemed like the more I tried to ignore them, the louder and more obnoxious they became. Every few weeks I found myself going up into the attic to take out the traps, and to be honest with you, I could probably count on one hand the amount of times the traps actually caught something. Eventually I did find out where the animals were getting in from, and I was able to patch the holes and block them off. I kind of figured that would be the end of it, but within the following weeks after I first patched a hole up there, the noises started up again. One night after work I was laying in bed, and I started to hear the banging noises again. I figured I should call an exterminator in the morning, so I grabbed the nearby phone book and circled one of the numbers. I tore the page out of the phone book and stuck it under my phone, so that way I'd remember to call them in the morning. By the time I'd laid back down in bed, I noticed that the noise coming from the attic had changed. This time, it sounded like footsteps. Not full-grown footsteps, but these were more childlike. That's the best way I can describe it, I guess. Very small and very delicate, but very obvious. They sounded just like a child running across the floor, struggling to regain their balance, like the way a toddler runs just after they learn how to walk. At this point, I figured it was just a larger animal, like maybe a raccoon or something. But again, this didn't really sound like an animal. After a few more minutes of this, the footsteps sounded more frantic, more hurried. They went from what sounded like walking to what sounded like skipping, and after a few minutes of that, they started to sound like running. A few moments later, I heard a crashing noise coming from the attic. I quickly opened the attic door, flipped on the light switch, and made my climb up the stairs. By the time I could see over the top stair, I saw what the crashing noise was. Something had knocked over a box of Christmas tree ornaments, and the bulbs had shattered all over the floor, leaving glass everywhere. Again, I was thinking an animal had done this, and as I said, I had already planned to call an exterminator in the morning. I went back downstairs to grab a broom and dustpan, and then made my way back upstairs to clean up the mess. As I began sweeping the glass up, something in one of the dark corners of the attic caught my eye. It was almost like a faint blinking light, flickering on and off, over and over again. It started out as one light, and then it was two lights. They glowed kind of strangely, kind of like how a cat's eyes would glow when you shine a light on them. I finished sweeping up the glass and went back downstairs to grab a flashlight. I made my way back up the stairs, and when I shined my light into the corner where I saw the flashing light coming from, I could finally see what was making the light. There in the corner of the attic was a doll. As I approached it, I noticed that the eyes looked like they were blinking. This freaked me out a little bit, but I still decided to pick the doll up and have a closer look. When I picked the doll up and stood it upright, both the eyes opened up. And when I tilted the doll as if laying it down, both the eyes closed. I had seen these types of dolls when I was a kid. They were the kind that were supposed to look like they were sleeping when you laid them down, and awake when you stood them up. I kind of chuckled about this for a moment, because when I looked at the way the doll was dressed, as well as the eye color and hair color, I noticed that this exactly matched what my cousin had described when she talked about her friend in the attic. I figured that was it. Mystery solved. And again, I had a good laugh about it. I placed the doll back down in the corner and made my way down the stairs, shutting off the light and closing the attic door. Before I'd even taken one step away from the door, I heard something behind me. It was very faint, but very distinct. Like a giggle, or a laugh. A child's laugh, coming from just behind the attic door. I don't know why I did this, but I slowly opened the door back up, and when I looked up at the top of the stairs, I saw it. Two small blinking lights, just like the ones I saw in the corner of the attic where the doll was. Only this time, they were at the top of the stairs, in complete darkness, looking down at me. I quickly slammed and then locked the door, vowing to myself never to open that door up again under any circumstance, and to never go anywhere near that attic. I stayed at that house for maybe another 6 months before moving out, and every night during those 6 months, that banging noise continued. Whenever friends would come over and they'd ask me what was upstairs, I'd always tell them it was storage. And whenever they asked about those banging noises coming from the attic, My reply was always the same. I really need to call an exterminator. I'm in high school. Therefore, from the moment I turned 16, my parents wouldn't shut up about me needing to get a job. I didn't want to work as a waitress or work at a fast food joint, so I settled for babysitting. My experiences for the most part have always been good while babysitting. The kids are usually good, there's free food involved, etc. About 2 months ago, probably not even that long ago, my mom got a call from an old friend of hers asking if I still babysat. They were going out to a benefit, and they fired their original sitter due to finding out that she had been stealing small things throughout their house. I accepted, of course, and finally the day came, and I drove over there. I hadn't been to their house before that night, so I had no idea where I was going. When I say they lived far from town, I mean they really lived far from town. It felt like I had been driving for so long that I was already in the next state over. No matter though, soon enough, I see the only house for miles in the distance. I walked up to the front door, did my introductions, etc. She gave me a tour of the house and it was phenomenal. Allow me to give you a rundown of the house. It was 2 stories. Don't forget the attic and the basement. Beautifully decorated. Each room was 10 times bigger than they needed to be. Just a grand house overall. Also, by the time I got there, it was going on 6 p.m., and they were going to be gone until around 2 a.m. From the get-go, small but still creepy things start happening. I would be downstairs watching TV and would hear footsteps coming from upstairs. I would explore the house and would swear I was in a stupid scary movie due to all the jump scares that were happening to me. The kids fell asleep around 8 p.m. They were 6 and 8, so it was understandable. So I was ready to spend the next 6 to 7 hours alone. At exactly 8:44 p.m., the house phone started ringing. I can remember the exact time because I remember checking the clock thinking to myself, why would somebody be calling? I'm sure they know that these people went to a benefit. It wasn't that big of a deal though, so I answered it. I must have asked, hello, around 5 times in a row before finally hanging up. About 10 minutes later, the phone rings again. Hello? Hello, is anyone there? No answer, so I hang up. Throughout the course of an hour, the phone had rang 2 more times, but I decided not to answer because I just assumed they were prank calls. Finally though, the phone rings again. I decide I'm going to answer it and tell whoever it is to stop calling. Before I even have the chance to say anything, the person on the other end asks why I didn't pick up the last 2 times. I ask who it is, and I get no response. I sat there waiting for whoever it was to say something for at least 30 seconds before finally asking them to stop calling.
But I like the sound of your voice.
I got freaked out and instantly hung up. Immediately after I hung up, I started closing the curtains. You know that feeling you get when you think someone's watching you? Yeah, I had that feeling to the fullest extent. I think I started playing Temple Run or Angry Birds or some stupid game on my phone by that point. I hear someone walking down the stairs, and it's the 6-year-old telling me that she's scared of the monster hiding in her closet. I try to comfort her and laugh, telling her that if she just imagines things that she likes, then she won't think about monsters. I walk her back to her room, tuck her in, and close the door behind me. As I'm walking down the stairs, the phone rings again. By now, I'm not only creeped out, but annoyed by whoever keeps calling. I answer it and just flat out ask them what they want. And yeah, you guessed it, I get no answer. After I hang up, someone starts knocking on the front door. Am I that big of an idiot to answer the door in the middle of nowhere at going on 10-something at night? Hell no. I try to look through the peephole, but it was being covered. I call the benefit and ask to speak with the parents. I speak with the mother and just ask if they think they'll be coming home sooner. I tried not to seem like anything was wrong, but I think she could just hear it in my voice. I told her everything was fine, that I was just getting weird phone calls, and that someone had knocked on the door. She asked if I wanted them to come home early, and I felt rude saying yes, so I settled with no. The house phone rings 3 times within 20 minutes at most, and I ignore all 3 calls. I really started to wish I had said yes to them coming home early. I tried to distract myself in so many ways possible, but nothing was really helping. The phone rings for the millionth time and I decide to answer it. Don't ask me why. I ask the same questions. Why do you keep calling? Why won't you say anything? And so on. He then starts to say that he's in the house and that he's watching the kids and myself. I try to play it off cool and laugh, asking him sarcastically, "Oh yeah? Then where are you?" He replies, telling me he's in a closet. Instantly, I remember the 6-year-old daughter telling me that she was afraid of the monster hiding in her closet. Before running upstairs, I called the police and told them that I thought someone was in the house. I was almost too afraid to go upstairs, but I somehow did it. I wake the kids up and race downstairs, and we get in the car. I turn it on and pull out, waiting outside the driveway, but not turning the car off. I was told to wait for the police, which was the only thing stopping me from leaving. The police got there and searched the house. They found that all of the knives from the knife holder had been removed and were found in the daughter's closet. Whoever had been there was long gone by the time the police got there. How he got in and out without me noticing, I have no clue. After that experience, I have never babysat again. Can you blame me? A few years ago, I was working as a gas station attendant at an H-E-B in a suburban town neighboring Houston, Texas. I had been working there for a few months at the time of this occurrence. Anyway, one day I'm working around 6 or 7 p.m. when I get a sudden rush of customers after a long period of no activity, and most are paying with cash. This is not uncommon working at a gas station, at least not in my area. Once I get through about 15 or 20 customers that had lined up, things calm down. Even so, I keep watch on the customers, mostly to make sure nobody stole anything. Anything stolen during my shift would likely come out of my paycheck. At about this time, a beat-up truck comes speeding up to the station, slams on the brakes, and nearly runs into my kiosk. He parks very sloppily, dead in the center of all the action. Out steps a pale, lanky man in a wife-beater and grungy jeans, covered in tattoos. He almost runs up to my kiosk. At this point, I note to myself that the man's tattoos are neo-Nazi tattoos. Eagles, lightning SS symbols, swastikas, the works. Doing my job, I ask him how I can help him. He doesn't want gas, doesn't want cigarettes, doesn't want food. He wants to use the bathroom and wants as much cleaning supplies as I can spare. Paper towels, soap. He specifically mentions cleaning chemicals. I notice he has some reddish stains on his hands and forearms. I tell him he can go over to the main store to go to the bathroom. I give him some paper towels and nothing more. As he goes back to his truck, I watch him closely. He seems very nervous to me, and is almost frantically cleaning himself and the inside of his car as best he can. At this point, I call the main store to report the suspicious behavior, but they're not helpful. I notice at this point that his passenger window has been more or less shattered, and he's pushing the many remaining shards out of his car and onto the pavement. I see that he sees me on the phone. Almost immediately, he gets the car going and drives off, but stops in the parking lot. He's there for less than a minute and then speeds off. It's getting dark at this point. I want to investigate more or call the store again, but I get another wave or two of customers and my hands are tied. About an hour later, I finally get a chance to clean up the giant mess of shattered window the guy left for me. Upon closer inspection of the shards, I find large clumps of black curly hair amongst the debris. They appear to be from someone's scalp, and they appear to have blood on them. I get some latex gloves from the kiosk, put them on, and use them to pick up the hair clumps and put them in a bag, like something out of CSI. I call the main store again with the news, and my supervisor doesn't seem particularly concerned. At the end of my shift, I turn the evidence over to my boss, and he says he'll take care of it. A few days later, I checked with my boss to see what happened with the evidence. He said the police weren't going to investigate. Go figure. I'm a web designer by profession, and this can lead to some very odd hours when multiple projects are going on at the same time. Between testing one, writing code for another, and debugging a third, sometimes I find myself at the office far past when everyone else has left. My badge is not set up for after-hours working, so I have no way back in the building if I leave after 6 p.m. So usually if I work late, whenever I get to a point where I have to leave for food or something, I just call it a night. Last night I found myself working late again. There were a few of us. You tend to see the same people working late, but there was clearly less than usual. At around 8 p.m., it was down to myself and a database architect that was working to push out his last few lines of code for the night. He dropped by to tell me good night and not to stay too late. The usual office chit-chat. I waved goodbye and watched him walk out into the dark night. As is usual with most offices, our lights are motion activated, so one by one, the lights were starting to go out in the building. Fine by me. I have a lamp in my cube for the night, and the ambience helps my eyes. Around 9 or 9:30, I decided I needed some food, so I took my leftover sandwich from lunch and went to the break room to heat it up. Now, we all know most offices have weird noises, servers, building noises, etc. And in the dark and quiet, it's all heightened. But while the microwave was heating up the turkey club I was about to call dinner, I swear I heard footsteps, running. I peeked out into the hallway, and all I could see was dark. Not even the windows letting in moonlight. Just abyss. I heard the ding of the microwave behind me and I almost jumped out of my skin. I turned around, and standing on the other end of the kitchen area was a man. I figured someone else was just working late, so I called out to him that he had scared me half to death. He didn't turn around. He just walked out of the kitchen and back toward the cubicles. I ate my sandwich, laughing about how a cleaning crew guy or a night owl like me had scared me into thinking I saw something. That's when I realized he walked out the door back to the work area, and no lights had come on. I jumped up and ran back out towards my desk, looking everywhere for him. Lights were coming on all over the place and no one was there. That's when I heard the running again. This time, coming from the break room kitchen to the other side of the building. By the time I made it back to the connecting hallway, the sound had stopped, but I was fully spooked. Those were definitely footsteps running, and I know I saw a man here. I packed up for the night and took to looking in the other side of the building just to see. Sure enough, light after light revealed no one else was in the building. I had all but chalked it up to nerves and stress when I heard it again. Running to the front of the office near the bathrooms, the only place still with darkness. I headed up there, and as I turned the corner to the bathrooms, the door was shutting. I found him. I breathed a sigh of relief as I strutted into the bathroom, exclaiming that whoever was working late sure was sketching me out and having a good laugh about it. But then I flipped on the light switch, and the bathroom was empty and silent. The whole office was quiet as ever. I sat down to use the facilities before I left, and what really creeped me out, the seat was warm, like someone had just been in here using it, not 5 seconds before me. For those of you unfamiliar, Snapchat is a messaging app that allows users to send pictures and videos for up to 10 seconds to each other. It's a lot of fun and is something I use on a regular basis. Once the photo is viewed, you can't look at it again unless you screenshot the image. It was starting to get late. I was bored out of my mind watching Netflix, and I needed something to do. I had the brilliant idea of going on Omegle. Of course, this led to a lot of naked men in porn ads. I was about to go find another distraction when I finally found a normal match on Omegle. It was a dark room, with a cute-looking young woman sitting in front of her webcam. I figured it was fake, and it was going to be a screamer or some prank. After an awkward silence, I was about to click next when she said hello. Immediately following that was the text, "Hit me up on Snapchat, Sasha247. I pulled out my phone and added her just for the hell of it. Right as I added her, she disconnected. I sent a snap saying, "What's up? I was just on Omegle," and proceeded to wait. It was around 1:30 in the morning now, and I went back to watching Netflix. At 2 a.m., I got a reply. It was her. It was a picture of her car, followed by the text, "On my way, baby." I simply responded with, "Be safe, LOL." I then fell asleep. The next day, I wake to my phone and discover the horror, opening one snap at a time. The first is of her driving. A little weird, but I don't think much of it. Then things started getting real. I got more snaps of her driving. One had her at a stoplight. I noticed a Walmart next door to a gym. The very same Walmart and gym, just a few minutes away from my house. So at this point, I'm starting to freak out. I don't really know what to do. I open another snap of her entering my neighborhood, accompanied with the text, "Get ready." The final snap is a 10-second video of her filming my house. This all happened to me last night, and I've already notified the police. This seems like it could be someone in my area looking to freak people out as a prank or something. But has something like this ever happened to any of you? I've never felt so scared before in my life. About 7 years ago, 3 of my friends, let's call them friends A, B, and C, were going to have a sleepover at A's house. We were all between the ages of 14 and 15. A lived with his grandfather. His grandmother had passed away a few months before he was born and had lived a full life as a photographer, but she struggled and eventually died from breast cancer, which then took his mother about 8 years later. His father was out of the picture before she was diagnosed. So that particular night, his grandfather was out of town for a funeral for an old war buddy, and we had the house to ourselves. We stayed up late playing Super Smash Bros. Melee, and we were all crashed at about 2 a.m. on the floor in the living room. Later that night, I woke up freezing cold, which was odd because it had been a fairly warm day. I checked the time. It was 4:30 a.m. I look around and see a red blinking light on the coffee table. I make a mental note about that seeming out of place, but I was too cold, not to mention tired, to get up, so I rolled over and I went back to sleep. The next morning, I wake up to A shaking me violently. I open my eyes, and I can tell by his face that something is wrong. I try to ask him what's going on, but he just points at the coffee table. On the table was his grandmother's last Kodak camera. He tells me that it hasn't been out of his grandmother's drawer since she's been dead. He's only ever looked in there. We try to blow it off. Maybe his grandpa was getting nostalgic because of his war buddy's death reminding him of his wife's death and took it out to remember or something. B, C, and I were pretty satisfied with that, though A still had some doubts. A week goes by and we had all pretty much forgot about that strange morning, except for A, who had been stressing out about it ever since. He decides to go get the camera's pictures developed. He calls us all the next day. I can hear his voice trembling as he begs us to hurry over. When we get there, he throws down the bundle of pictures in front of us. We flip through them, and most of what looked like some last scenic trip his grandmother had taken before she died. When we got to the last 3 pictures, I froze. B and C both gasped. The pictures were of us. All 4 of us captured in each picture, sleeping on the floor in front of the television. No one else was home that night. The camera had no self-timer. I still haven't been able to explain it, and get freaked out when I think back on it. Let me start by saying, to hell with dolls. Funny thing is, I didn't always think that way. I used to love them. The smooth faces, the eyes that seemed to stare into the soul. I found them beautiful. When I was 10, I had quite the collection of dolls. For some strange reason, I decided to decorate my room with them. My room was in the basement, and I had a shelf that circled the room. I delicately placed my favorites around my room. Being watched wasn't something I was worried about. In fact, I found them oddly comforting. My 11th birthday rolled around, and I couldn't wait to see what new dolls I would get. Everyone in my family knew of my obsession and would gift me a new friend every year. This year, my grandmother took the cake with the gorgeous doll she brought me. I still vividly remember her. Her glassy green eyes, flawless pale skin, sleek black hair pulled back with a pink ribbon, and a white gown that slightly resembled one used for baptisms. I was so excited to show her her new home. I made room on my shelf across the room, almost opposite my bed, so that I would have the best view of her. That night, I dozed off staring at her, making up a story, a background, a life. I have never had a more vivid dream, not before nor after that night. I was low to the ground. It seemed like I was crawling, but it didn't feel like it, moving slowly toward my bedroom door. I could see the soft glow of my nightlight coming from under the door. I eased it open and walked towards my bed. That's when I noticed that I really wasn't me, because there in the bed was me, sleeping soundly. I was frightened, but couldn't wake up. I crawled into the bed and moved slightly towards sleeping me. In my line of sight, I saw two smooth, delicate, tiny hands reach for my throat. I jumped awake, breathing heavily. Across the room, I could see my doll, exactly where I left her. I got up, walked to the bathroom, with a second glance at the doll. As I passed the mirror, I noticed something that still haunts me. 3 scratches on my neck, dried blood surrounding them. I tried writing them off to me accidentally doing it in my sleep. That didn't last long. I walked back to my room, absent-mindedly flipped on the light, and stopped. There on the floor, facing the door, was my doll. Same innocent look as always, but with a small, almost unnoticeable smear of blood on her dress. I screamed, ran to my brother's room, and through tears, tried to explain what happened. He didn't buy it, but wasn't about to send me away like that. I spent the rest of the night in his room. The next morning, I made him come with me back to my room. She was back on the shelf, as if she had never been moved. The smear of blood was still on her dress. We grabbed some old boxes and packed every one of those horrid things away. After some convincing and complaining, my mom finally agreed to take the dolls to the rented storage shed across town. It's 10 years later, and as far as I know, they are all still there. For all I care, they can stay there. To begin, I'll describe the place I work, since that's where most of the stuff has taken place. I was hired on about 6 months ago at an old hospital to schedule patient appointments. That involves verifying medical records, insurance information, getting them scheduled according to the doctor's orders without getting yelled at, and blah blah blah. You get the picture. So the hospital itself is actually kind of cool. It was built in the late 1800s, but recently a new one was built, so most of the departments have moved across town to the new one. For some reason, our department was left behind with a "we'll move you over soon" type of deal from the executives. Okay, so we're here, along with a few other small departments. Mostly alone, I have to emphasize. Walking around the building is kind of creepy sometimes, especially being super quiet in a building you would imagine to mostly be loud. Sort of like seeing an amusement park in the off-season. There's just something weird about it. Anyways, so I started a while ago, like I said, and noticed almost right off that strange things happen. Just little things at first, like cold spots in my office and whatnot. I guess my department used to be what they called the cave, which was a windowless hellhole in the basement where everyone was scrunched together, and this one lady smelled bad, so everyone had to suffer through it. Just glad I started after they moved upstairs. I have a window, I'm not next to the smelly person, and so on. Things aren't great, but better than most of the other jobs I've held in the past. So, only a few weeks ago I did start to notice things getting weirder. Sometimes I'll go down to the cafeteria by myself. They have super crappy food that tastes like plastic. And to get there I need to walk down several abandoned hallways. Many of them have old doctor's offices and patient rooms. This one day I was heading down to the elevators, the ones on the east side, since the one closest to my department supposedly was the one they used to transport dead bodies to the morgue, and it just smells kind of funky. I hear this creepy laughter down this hall off to my left. Kinda sounded like one of my coworkers, so I thought they might be just around the corner. I peeked my head down and there was no one there. It's an area I haven't yet explored and it was no longer in use. Needless to say, I hurried my way along to the elevator and tried to write it off as either a prank or my imagination. Another thing, these elevators I use are the least creepy in the building, but they are still creepy sometimes. I'll be heading down the hall and hear the ding announcing the arrival of an elevator. The doors will open on their own when I'm about to hit the button. I'm always hesitant to get in after that, but I always do anyways. Sometimes I'll even say thank you when I'm alone, just in case there's some ghosts that will haunt me for not being grateful. I know, I'm weird. Jumping back to where I said things started getting weirder. One time a few weeks ago, I was on my way to lunch and hopped in the elevator. Alone, of course, after it opened on its own. I was between floors when the lights flickered and the elevator stopped. There wasn't like a huge crash and a lot of shaking or anything stupid like you would see in the movies. It just slowed down and stopped. Almost like, I don't feel like elevatoring today, so I'm gonna stop. So I stand there for a few moments trying to figure out what to do. Do I call the police? Do I hang out so I don't have to go back to work? As I'm deliberating, I suddenly feel this quick exhale of air right by my ear. It sounds exactly like someone just breathed a heavy sigh. Freaked me out so bad I had my back to the doors immediately and was pressed against them as if I was hoping I could slide through them to the other side. There wasn't anything in the elevator with me. The elevator started moving again as I tried to slow my breathing, and I almost fell out of the elevator when the doors finally slid open on the ground level. A couple of people were waiting for the elevator and gave me weird looks, but I ignored it. I was just happy to be out of there. I realized later that I hadn't said thank you. Maybe that's why it stopped? I don't know. So, here's where things get even more weird. I started training down at my desk we have in a lobby area on the main floor. It's a check-in for MRI patients, along with cardiac rehab and ECT. Nothing too exciting, but it was good to interact with real people and not just the voices over the phone when scheduling. So I was finally on my own last week down there. It's usually really boring. I mostly browse the internet and read Reddit stories. The one girl was sitting in a chair in the waiting room. I hadn't noticed her walk in. I was probably too absorbed in a story to notice, but I start looking at her and I can see she's about my age, maybe a little older, but 25, maybe 26. She has long brown hair that kinda hangs in her face. I've seen so many scary movies, my mind immediately pins her as a ghost or something stupid like that. I always daydream about stupid stuff like that to make my day more interesting. There's always a girl with long hair that kinda covers their features, right? Usually black hair though, especially in Japanese horror movies. She doesn't move for a while, and at first I thought she might be waiting for a parent or grandparent to come down from an appointment. But after an hour, I ask her if she needs anything. She doesn't move, so I'm not sure if she heard me or not. I stand up and lean over the counter a little and I repeat myself. She finally stands up really quick. It's almost like a twitch, but her whole body. Kinda creepy, but not enough to wig me out completely. She leans her head back a little so that some of her hair comes off her face. She has deep blue eyes, very pretty, and very white teeth, which I can see now that she's smiling. It's an odd smile, but endearing. "I'm waiting for my father," she says in a dreamy voice, kinda like Luna from HP. I smile back and ask what kind of appointment he had to help her determine when he'd be done. "He was admitted to the ER this morning. I've been waiting a long time." I check the clock hanging above my computer and see it's almost 4. But I could have sworn she hadn't been there for more than an hour. Maybe she had been on the other side of the hospital. That's where the old ER entrance is. The thing is, we don't have an ER anymore. That all moved to the new hospital. "Did you come in with him?" I asked, trying to give her the benefit of the doubt. "The ER is actually at the new hospital now, which is across town." She looks a little crestfallen at my response, blue eyes on the floor. For being in her 20s, she sure does act like a little girl. "Maybe he came in here and they moved him?" I suggest, just wanting to help. She smiles a little at this and proceeds to walk over to the elevators that are right next to the receptionist area we're in. The doors open before she presses the button and she steps on, turning around to face me. "I'll go find him," she says quietly before the doors slide shut in front of her. Her eyes seem to glow in a brief instant before the doors close. Like I said, things have gotten a little weird around here. Not to say that girl was super weird, but there was just something off about this situation, you know? She was cute and creepy and weird and sweet all at the same time. Not 2 days after that, I think I saw her again on my way to lunch. Let me explain. I was heading down a dark hallway to get to the elevators when I saw something out of the corner of my eye through the little windows on a pair of double doors. It's the entrance to where our long-term care patients used to stay. But as we no longer have that, there shouldn't be anyone back there. Here and there we'll get a few homeless people trying to squat in various areas of the hospital. So I sigh and push my way through the doors saying, "You're not supposed to be in here. You need to leave or I'll call security." I tap my foot a little as I wait for someone to respond. Usually they give up right away. But I see a flash of light down a hall darting around a corner. I contemplate calling security and letting them deal with it, but something about that light piqued my curiosity. I'm too curious for my own good sometimes. I run over to the corner to try and catch a glimpse of whoever's in there, and I see long brown hair under the light blue disappear through a door before it closes. My mind jumped to that girl from earlier. Why was she still here? I get to the door, but the knob won't turn. It's even a little warm, which is weird since most of the hospital is freezing. After a few tries, I give up and resolve myself to telling security. After lunch, I hear back from security. It appears that no one has a key to that room anymore. It used to be some doctor's office, I guess. So of course no one's in there. Or somehow that girl or whoever it was happens to have a key that the hospital misplaced a long time ago. I run through what happened in my head and guess that I might have imagined the door closing. I don't know. It's just some weird stuff. Anyway, I saw that girl again yesterday. She said she was waiting for her dad again. It was as if our first conversation had never happened. There was no recognition in her blue eyes when she stood up, and she walked into the elevator with a, "I'll go find him," again. I'm kind of creeped out, but I don't know if it's enough to be worried. Things seem to be escalating, but not drastically, and no one's been hurt. Yet. It was the fall I started community college. I had my fair share of creepers, being 18 and fairly fit, but this one was the worst I've ever had. It's the only really scary thing that has personally happened to me. I was on the bus from my English class, which had let out at 8:45. It was dark, windy, and cold, so when I saw a homeless man bored with not enough money to pay for his fare, I decided to pay for him. I'll never forget what he looked like. He had a cataract in one eye, greasy hair parted down the middle. One side was gray and the other side was black. A navy blue beanie, and a ratty hooded brown coat with the hood up. He thanked me profusely and held out his hand as if indicating he wanted to shake mine. I gave him my hand and he kissed it. Or, I thought he did, but more on that later. It felt really slobbery. He was foreign, so I thought maybe in his culture this is how he thanked people, so I just wiped my hand off on my jeans when he wasn't looking. He started asking me questions. Ones that were pretty standard for some of the people I went on the bus with. He asked if I was a student, what I studied, and how my classes were going. He then asked if I rode the bus at this time every day. And that's when the red flags came. I gave him a vague answer saying that it depended, which was true enough because my English class wasn't every day. 2 days later I start making the same trip. He picks me up at the same spot. He acts all surprised when seeing me, but something told me he was looking for me. I was in the back, which was this large bench seat, and he comes and sits next to me. Without asking, he grabs my hand, and then I realized that he hadn't been kissing it as he rose it to his mouth. He had been licking it. I felt sick to my stomach and paralyzed with fear and disgust. He told me that Christmas was coming up and that he was a very lonely man, and asked if I would join him this Christmas. I made up something and told him that I was going to see family out of state for Christmas. He started asking me where I worked, and I told him that I worked at a department store, but not the name or the location. I texted my mom that I needed to be picked up from the bus stop. I started wearing hooded jackets so I could hide my face. He would come on the bus, look around, and if he didn't see me, he would get off. I had even heard him telling the driver that he was looking for me. If he did see me, he wouldn't try to talk to me now, but he would stand near me and give me a death stare. I would have gotten up to tell the bus driver, but if I made a move, he would step closer. I texted my mom to pick me up every night. She knew something was up, so I finally told her, sobbing like a baby. She told me I needed to take action, but I was too terrified. Finally, I knew it was the breaking point. After 2 months of fearing for my life, I asked my then BF and my friend who looked like a bear mated with a metal head, I'll call him Adam, to sit with me. They flanked me as I told the bus driver what was going on. The bus driver told me something that made my heart sink, that there wasn't much he could do. I hid my face as the creep came on the bus. He stared at me and started to come toward me. Adam gave him a death glare and I was surprised. The creep looked scared, but he still tried to grab my attention.
Get away from her,
the bus driver yelled. The creeper looked up, bewildered.
Yeah, you. Get away from her,
the bus driver yelled again.
She's my friend,
the creeper whined.
She doesn't want to be your friend. Get away from her.
The creeper backed off. I sighed in relief. Adam told me later that he had asked his brother, I'll call him Dave, about this guy, and apparently the brother came across him before. Dave had been on another line when the creeper sat next to him. There were a couple of teen girls and the creeper leaned over and asked Dave how much he'd pay him if he ate those girls right in front of him. Dave said that if he ever saw him again, he would rip his throat out. He never saw the creeper on that line again. Unfortunately, this isn't the end of the story. A year later, Adam and my ex were taking me home when we looked up and there was the creeper. He came and sat by me and Adam gave him a death stare when he tried to get my attention. He then started a conversation with a man who was bragging about being a security guard at a local venue. The security guard was getting ready to do a Lady Gaga concert, and the creeper asked him if she would be in lingerie. The security guard looked weirded out and said something like, "Yeah, I guess." I never saw him again after that. I'm 27 now, turn 28 next month. This story takes place 10 years ago when I was a senior in high school. Keep in mind that this is a true experience I've gone through. This isn't a secondhand story. During summer break leading up to my senior year, my mom and I had to move. I'll save you the details, but we ended up on government housing. The rent was dirt cheap, but the downside was the neighborhood. I live in Oklahoma, by the way. Our first day in our new apartment, there was a meeting called because the police officer that patrols the complex was shot. That should give you an idea of how bad things were there. The complex did have a gate around it, even though it was never locked. If I go out the back door, I'd pass through the gate and into a 7-Eleven parking lot. Even the people who worked there were awful. Despite only having 4 pumps, the parking lot was big with a payphone on both sides. The phone on the west side of the building right next to the bus stop was broken, even though it looked normal. We will be coming back to that payphone. It was a Friday night and my brother had invited me over to stay the night. He lived in an awful neighborhood as well, about 5 to 10 miles away. We were both adjusting to living in bad neighborhoods. His was slightly better. His was more drug dealing while mine was more violence. Life was depressing as we didn't even have a house phone. All I had were my CDs and N64 and that was already pretty dated. I felt cut off from the world, but I was gonna go hang out with my brother, so I was excited. We had a car, but we were poor and I didn't have enough money for gas, so I hopped on the city bus. This is where it gets weird. I watched the bus from my back door because there's no way I was standing in front of that creepy payphone. I pay my fare and have a seat in the back. I came in through the door closest to the back of the bus, so I barely noticed there was another person sitting in the middle. He was an older white guy, really creepy looking. Had to be late 40s. My first thought was how grateful I was for being a male, because if I were a 16-year-old girl on that bus with this guy, she might not make it home. Now, I didn't actually think that he would go super creeper, but I was wrong. This was the last bus on this route for the night. My house was at the beginning and my brother's house was towards the end. Surely I thought that if I'm on the bus for 40 minutes out of the 50 minutes it takes for the bus to go one way, this guy would get off before me. But he stayed. And stayed. Then I started getting nervous. Where was this guy going? Surely he had a planned destination before I got on. My stop approached. The bus fare was 60 cents. I only had 90 cents after I paid the fare. I was going to stop and get a cheap canned soda, so I hit the button in front of the store. Now, the creepy guy who had been trying to pretend he wasn't looking back at me every few minutes hears the ding. He quickly pretends to hit the button as if it were his stop. I'm now officially scared. I skipped on the soda, which oddly enough probably saved my life. I didn't want to run because I felt that he would pick up on my fear and make a move, but I did walk pretty fast and was out of the bus before he had the chance to stand up. Once out of view, I bolted to my brother's apartment. The door's locked. He's not home. The sun is going down and I have nowhere to hide. He's always home on Friday. He's always home at this time. But I realized that the creepy guy was nowhere in sight and I calmed down. But I did know he was out there somewhere. The bus had 5 minutes before it hit the end of the line and turns around. 5 minutes from my brother's to the end and back only gave me 10 minutes to make a choice, and I already wasted 5 minutes. I decided to try to catch the bus home, seeing as how I still had 90 cents. I make it to the stop to see the bus coming back. If I had wasted a minute longer, I'd be stuck there. But from behind an apartment building, he emerged, looking at me until the bus door opened, and he got back on. I had 30 seconds to decide if I was going to be alone in this neighborhood after dark, stuck outside, or get on the bus he just got on. My logic was that at least if I got on the bus, there would be a driver with me, so I wouldn't be alone. I got on the bus. I decide to sit right next to the driver. I look back and he's sitting in the spot I was during the first ride. He knew I was onto him, but he wasn't going to give up. After the quietest 40-minute bus ride, I hit the button in front of the 7-Eleven because I figured people would see if this guy tried anything. Once again, he pretended like it was his stop, hearing the ding, looking at me, and pressing the button. I was by the door. This time I ran. Seeing a 16-year-old running for his life out of a bus got some looks. Then people looked back at the bus. I got to the gate, and when I turned around to see where he was, we locked eyes. He got nervous now that people were looking at him, so he grabbed the payphone, pushed a few buttons, and started talking. He was pretending to have a conversation on the broken payphone. That's when I knew this guy had bad intentions, that I wasn't just paranoid. I didn't realize how lucky I was until I walked into the apartment. There was my mom and my brother. My brother forgot I was coming over and had just arrived moments before I did. He had his backpack and clothes and said that he had come over to stay the night. In other words, if I didn't get back on that bus, I would have been sitting on the porch of my brother's apartment for God knows how long, until someone went looking for me, which they did not have the gas to do.